You look at your backyard and you think, I do not have enough space to grow anything meaningful. Maybe you have a small suburban lot. Maybe you have a few raised beds squeezed between the patio and the fence. You plant some tomatoes, a few peppers, maybe a row of lettuce, and by July you have gotten a handful of salads and a couple of BLTs out of the deal. Hardly worth the effort, right? Now here is what should stop you in your tracks. There is an Amish family in Lancaster County, Pennsylvania, growing enough food to feed themselves for an entire year from a garden plot roughly the size of a one-car garage. 200 square feet, that is 10 feet by 20 feet. And they are not just growing a little lettuce, they are growing tomatoes, beans, squash, root vegetables, greens, herbs, and enough of all of it to fill their pantry, their root cellar, and their canning shelves from September clear through to the following June. Same sun you have, same soil you can build, a fraction of the space you think you need. So what do they know that the rest of us missed? My name is Dennis Harwell. I have been gardening for over 30 years, and for most of that time I was convinced that serious food production required serious acreage. I had this picture in my head of what a real vegetable garden looked like, and it was big. Wide rows, lots of walking paths, plenty of breathing room between plants. Then I started spending time around Amish growers, not reading about them, actually standing in their gardens, and what I saw made me realize I had been wasting about half my garden space for my entire adult life. Walkways where food could be growing. Bare soil sitting idle between harvests. Vertical space I had never once thought to use. The Amish do not have the luxury of wasting space because for them, that garden is not a hobby. It is the family food supply. And that necessity produced methods that are, honestly, more intelligent than anything I learned in 30 years of gardening books and extension bulletins. Let me walk you through exactly how they do it. The Amish have a word, Gelassenheit, that roughly means yielding to the natural order. But in their gardens, there is a companion principle that I think matters even more for what we are talking about today. Nothing idle, nothing wasted. Every square inch of soil should be growing something. Every harvest should be preserved. Every plant should be replaced the moment it is finished producing. If you walk through a typical American home garden in August, you will find empty spots where the spring lettuce bolted, bare patches where the peas finished in June, maybe a whole bed sitting dormant because the gardener has not gotten around to planting a fall crop. In an Amish garden, that simply does not happen. The soil is never bare, the space is never idle, and the harvest is never left to rot on the vine because they did not get to it in time. That discipline is what turns 200 square feet into a year's worth of food. And it is completely learnable. Here are the 5 methods that make it work. The first thing you notice in an Amish intensive garden is that the plants are close together, much closer than what the seed packet tells you. And I know exactly what you are thinking because I thought it too. Will they not compete with each other? Will they not get diseased from poor air circulation? Here is the honest answer. They can, if you do it wrong. But the Amish are not just cramming plants in randomly. They are following a specific method that most American gardeners have heard of, but few actually commit to. It is essentially the same approach that Mel Bartholomew popularized as square-foot gardening, but the Amish were doing it long before that book was ever published. Instead of planting in long rows with wide walkways between them, which wastes roughly 40 to 50% of your garden space on paths, you plant in wide beds, typically 3 to 4 feet across, with narrow paths of 12 to 18 inches between them. Just enough room to reach in and work. Within those beds, plants are spaced based on their mature canopy size, not the generous row spacing printed on seed packets. Leaf lettuce goes in at 4 to 6 inches apart in all directions instead of 12 inches apart in rows. Carrots at 2 inches apart. Bush beans at 4 to 6 inches. Tomatoes still need their 18 to 24 inches, but they are surrounded by lower growing companions filling every gap. The key that makes this work without disease problems is soil quality. The Amish add massive amounts of compost to these intensive beds, typically 4 to 6 inches, worked into the top 8 to 10 inches of soil every single year. That rich, biologically active soil holds moisture evenly, provides dense nutrition, and supports the kind of root health that prevents the fungal issues you get when plants are crowded in poor dirt. I switched to this tight spacing method in my own garden 7 years ago, and I immediately got roughly double the yield from the same footprint. Not an exaggeration, the math is simple. When you eliminate wasted path space and plant at proper intensive spacing, you are using twice the growing area you were using before. The second thing you notice in an Amish intensive garden is that they think in 3 dimensions. While most of us garden on a flat plane, the Amish use every inch of vertical space available. And in a 200 square foot garden, vertical growing is not optional, it is essential. Pole beans instead of bush beans. That single switch gives you roughly 3 times the yield per square foot because the plants grow 8 to 10 feet tall on a simple trellis instead of spreading 18 inches wide on the ground. Cucumbers trained up a vertical frame of cattle panel or string netting instead of sprawling across 4 feet of bed space. The cucumbers actually produce straighter, cleaner fruit when they hang vertically, and you reduce slug and soil-borne disease problems at the same time. Indeterminate tomatoes staked and pruned to a single leader, growing 6 to 8 feet tall with all their energy directed into fruit production rather than lateral sprawl. Winter squash and small pumpkins trained up a sturdy A-frame trellis with simple fabric slings supporting the heavy fruit. Here is the practical setup. A section of cattle panel, which is a rigid wire grid panel typically 16 feet long and about 50 inches tall, bent into an arch over a 4-foot wide bed, creates a tunnel trellis. You plant climbing crops on both sides, beans on one side, cucumbers on the other. The plants grow up and over the arch, and you can plant shade-tolerant crops like lettuce and spinach underneath the canopy during the heat of summer when they would otherwise bolt. 1 structure, 3 growing zones, and you have not added a single square foot to your garden's footprint. That is the kind of thinking that separates Amish food production from what most of us are doing. This is the method that made me genuinely embarrassed about how I had been gardening for decades. Succession planting means that no piece of soil in your garden is ever sitting empty. The moment one crop finishes, the next one goes in. And ideally, you have planned it so the next crop is already started as seedlings, ready to transplant the same day you pull the spent plants. The Amish plan their gardens on a calendar, not just a planting chart. Let me give you a specific example of how one bed in a 200 square foot garden can produce 3 full harvests in a single season. In early spring, as soon as the soil can be worked, that bed gets planted with a cool season crop. Lettuce, spinach, radishes, or peas. These crops mature in 30 to 60 days depending on the variety. By late May or early June in zones 5 through 7, those crops are harvested and done. The same day, you clear the bed, add a 1-inch layer of compost, and transplant your warm season crop. Tomatoes, peppers, or bush beans that you started as seedlings indoors 6 to 8 weeks earlier. Those produce through the summer and into early fall. By September or early October, depending on your zone, those warm season crops are winding down. You pull them, add another inch of compost, and plant a fall crop. More lettuce, kale, turnips, or spinach. These crops actually taste better after a light frost and can produce well into November in many areas with a simple row cover for protection. That is 3 harvests from one bed in a single year. Multiply that across your entire garden and the math becomes staggering. A 200 square foot garden with 3 successions is effectively a 600 square foot garden in terms of total production. The Amish do not think of their garden as a fixed space. They think of it as a fixed space multiplied by time. And once you start thinking that way, the idea that you do not have enough room starts to feel like an excuse rather than a reality. I will be honest with you, the first year I tried serious succession planting, I messed up the timing and had a 3-week gap between my spring and summer crops where the bed sat empty. That gap cost me production. By year 2, I had the calendar dialed in, and the difference in total harvest was remarkable. Interplanting is companion planting's more productive cousin. It is the practice of growing 2 or more crops in the same bed at the same time, specifically choosing combinations where the plants do not compete with each other because they occupy different levels of space or mature at different rates. The classic Amish interplanting combination is radishes sown directly between transplanted tomato seedlings. When you transplant your tomatoes in late May, those small plants are only using a fraction of the bed space. The radishes germinate quickly, mature in 25 to 30 days, and are harvested long before the tomatoes need that space. You get a full radish crop from ground that would have otherwise been bare dirt for 6 weeks. Another combination I have seen in every Amish garden I have visited is lettuce planted in the partial shade of trellised beans or peas. The taller crop provides natural shade that keeps lettuce from bolting in the heat, extending your salad harvest by 3 to 4 weeks. Onions interplanted among rows of carrots work beautifully because the onion's strong scent repels carrot rust fly, while the carrot's feathery foliage shades the soil and helps retain moisture for the onion's shallow roots. Both crops mature on different timelines and occupy different root depths, so competition is minimal. The rule the Amish follow, and it is a simple one, is this: never combine 2 heavy feeders in the same bed at the same time. Tomatoes next to squash is a fight for nutrients. Tomatoes above lettuce is a partnership. Corn next to corn is competition. Corn above beans with squash below is the classic Three Sisters, and it works precisely because each plant occupies a different niche. Think of your bed as having layers: a tall layer, a medium layer, and a ground layer. If each layer is growing a different crop, you have tripled your production without adding a single square foot. Here is where the Amish approach diverges most sharply from what modern home gardeners typically do. For most of us, preserving the harvest is an afterthought. We grow more tomatoes than we can eat in August. We give some away, some rot on the counter, and by February we are buying tomatoes from the grocery store just like everyone else. The Amish do not let that happen. Preservation is not a bonus activity. It is the entire point. A single Amish household might can anywhere from 400 to 800 quarts of food in a season. Tomatoes, green beans, pickles, applesauce, peaches, salsa, jams, relishes, and dozens of other preparations. They also dry herbs, peppers, and beans. They store root crops like carrots, beets, potatoes, and turnips in root cellars or cool basement storage through the winter. Now, you do not need a root cellar or a farmhouse kitchen to do this. Here is what you do need: a pressure canner for low-acid foods like green beans, a water bath canner for high-acid foods like tomatoes, pickles, and fruit. Both are available for well under $100 and last for decades. A food dehydrator for herbs, hot peppers, and fruit leather, and a cool, dark storage space, which can be an unheated garage, a basement corner, or even a large cooler buried partway into the ground for root vegetable storage through the winter. The Amish follow tested recipes from sources like the Ball Blue Book or the National Center for Home Food Preservation, which is run through the University of Georgia. This is important. Canning is one area where you should not improvise. The safety guidelines exist for a reason, and the Amish follow them carefully even without internet access because the knowledge has been passed down and practiced consistently. The point is this: growing the food is only half the equation. If you grow 200 square feet of intensive vegetables and you eat fresh for 3 months and waste the rest, you have grown a summer garden. If you grow that same 200 square feet and you can dry and store the surplus, you have grown a year's worth of food. The preservation is what transforms a productive garden into a self-sufficient one. So let me set realistic expectations because I respect this audience too much to overpromise. Can 200 square feet truly feed a family for a year? It depends on the family and it depends on what you mean by feed. 200 square feet of intensively managed garden with succession planting, vertical growing, interplanting, and serious preservation can realistically produce between 400 and 600 pounds of food in a single growing season. For a household of 1 or 2 people, that is a tremendous amount. For a family of 4, it will not cover everything, but it will dramatically reduce your grocery bill and provide the majority of your vegetables year-round. The Amish families who achieve full self-sufficiency from very small plots typically have a few additional resources: fruit trees, a berry patch, chickens for eggs, and a longer tradition of whole diet preservation. So be honest with yourself about what your specific 200 square feet can produce and celebrate that production instead of measuring it against an impossible standard. If you're gardening in zones 3 and 4, your growing season is shorter, which means succession planting might give you 2 harvests per bed instead of 3. Use row covers and cold frames to extend both ends of your season. Season extension is the single biggest productivity multiplier for northern gardeners. In zones 8 and 9, you have the opposite. Advantage: You can often get 3 or even 4 successions per bed in a year, and your fall and winter gardens can be just as productive as your summer garden. Here is what I want you to take away from this. The Amish did not invent intensive gardening, and they would not claim to. What they did is commit to it completely, generation after generation, because wasting food and wasting space were never options. Most of us have been gardening with half our space sitting idle, half our vertical space unused, and half our harvest going to waste. Fix those 3 things and your garden's total output changes dramatically. You do not need more land. You need more intention. Start with one of these 5 methods this season. If tight spacing intimidates you, just try it in one bed and compare the results to your usual spacing. If succession planting sounds like too much planning, just commit to replanting one bed after your spring harvest instead of leaving it empty. One step at a time. That is how the Amish built these traditions, and it is how you can adopt them. Drop a comment and tell me which method you're going to try first, and if you know someone who keeps saying their yard is too small to grow real food, send them this video. That excuse just expired. I will see you in the next one.